Hi, I'm Sean Gannon, and this is Minute Math, and today we're learning about factoring trinomials when a is greater than 1.
Minute Math, when you need help you use Minute Math.
We're given this problem here, 3p squared minus 2p minus 5, and we want to factor this completely. I first look at my negative 5. I take that negative 5 and say, okay, what two numbers will multiply to be negative 5? We have, well, a positive 1 and a negative 5, and a negative 1 and a positive 5. Those two numbers, when they multiply, will equal a negative 5. When I see the a value here now being 3, its prime number, I know I have to have it in this form, 3p times some p times. And there's going to be a plus or minus some number here and plus or minus some number here, and that's going to be some combination of the two numbers that multiply to be my c value, negative 5. So now I'm going about this thinking, okay, when I multiply this out, what two numbers, right, multiply, or what number 3 times one of these numbers gets me close to negative 2? Well, if I multiply 3 here by 5, I'm nowhere near negative 2. I'm at 15, so I'm not going to explore that first. 3 times a 1. Well, if I put a 1 here, we know if we FOIL it, 3p times 1 gives me 3p. Then, if we take p times its pair, so negative 5 and minus 5 here, so 3p times 1 is 3p, negative 5 times p, right? Negative 5 times p gives you negative 5p. We add that together, gives us the negative 2, and that's kind of the goal there. So we try to think 3 times one of these numbers plus the other number gets me negative 2, and that's going to be 3p minus 5, and multiply that by p plus 1. We're given this problem here, 2n squared plus 3n minus 9, and we need to factor this completely. Since we have 2 out front, we know this problem, and we factor it, is going to be in the sum form of 2n plus or minus something times n plus or minus something else, 2 being a prime number there. Well, I need to look at my c value, negative 9. And I need to make a list of the numbers that multiply to be negative 9. That's a negative 1 and positive 9, 1 and negative 9, 3 and negative 3, and negative 3 and positive 3. Okay? So we have a list of the two numbers multiplying to be 9. Now we have to find out what 2 times one of these numbers plus 1, the coefficient in front of this n, times the other number gets us a positive 3. All right, so 2 times one of these numbers plus the other number, because multiply 1 is the other number, gives us a positive 3. All right, well, 2 times 3, right, 2 times 3 is 6. Subtract 3, and we get a positive 3. And so when I'm going through that, I'm looking for that. And the more you do it, you'll get better at recognizing that. Like, for example, if I went with 9, well, 2 times 9 is 18. I know I'll use that. That's just kind of way off. I kind of take my best educated guess right there. So if we have 2 times positive 3, we get 6. And then we have a minus 3 here. 6 minus 3 gives me a positive 3n. And we're good. And we have actually now factored this completely. We're given this problem here, 3n squared minus 8n plus 4, and we want to factor this completely. So let's look at it. We see a 3 as an a value, and that's a prime number. So we know this is going to be in some form 3n times, in parentheses there, n, and then we have plus something. So 3n plus something times n plus something. So now I need to look at c, my c value, which is 4. Well, c is a positive 4, but the b value is negative. That means the two numbers that multiply to be c both have to be negative. Okay? So what two numbers multiply to be 4, positive 4, but both being negative? Negative 1 and negative 4, and negative 2 and negative 2. So now I'm looking at this and saying, okay, 3 times one of these numbers plus the other number, right? 1 times the other number, or just the other number, which one gets me negative 8? Well, if I go 3 times a negative 4, I get a negative 12, plus another one, negative 13. No. 3 times a negative 2, on the other hand, is a negative 6, plus a negative 2 is a negative 8. So we have minus 2 here, and that's kind of our goal, right? 3 times a negative 2 is a negative 6, plus a negative 2 is a negative 8. That's like the kicker. So there we have our final answer, 3n minus 2 times n minus 2. We're given this problem here, 5n squared plus 19n plus 12, and we need to factor this completely. Our a value is prime, meaning we know it's going to be in some form of 5n, in parentheses, plus something, then times n plus something else, or minus. Well, with that, I then have to look at my c value, which is 12. And I want to write the list of the two numbers that multiply to be 12. That's 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Now, order doesn't really matter. It can be a flip of those. That's fine. So now we look at the b value, which is 19. We think, okay, 5 times which one of these numbers plus 1 times the other one gets me 19 here, okay? Well, 5, so let's kind of look at this. If I go through 5 times 12, that's going to be a very large number. What is that, 60? It's not going to be close to 19. So I kind of don't really worry about that. Maybe 5 times the 1. You can think that's 5, and then plus 12. That's going to be 17, not there. But let's keep going down. I try to find which one gets me the closest, okay? Well, 5n times the 3 gets me 15. 15 plus 4 is 19. So that's my goal there. And the more you practice, you'll be able to guesstimate which one would be most likely the answer. So 5n times a 3, put a 3 here on this side because 5n will be multiplied by 3, gets you 15, plus 4 goes right there. And there we have our answer, 5n plus 4 times n plus 3, and that is the answer factored. We're given this problem right here, 2v squared plus 11v plus 5, and we have to see, we're just trying to factor this completely. That's what we're looking for. We'll look at the a value. A value is 2, prime number. So we know it's going to be in some form of 2v plus something times v plus something else or minus something else, right? We then look at the c value, which is 5. We have to find what two numbers multiply to be 5. And since their b value is positive, they're both going to be positive. And that's just 1 and 5. Or 5 and 1. Order doesn't really matter right now. So once I have that list, it's only 1 and 5, so they have to be here. We're then looking at the b value. And we say, okay, 2 times one of these numbers plus 1 times the other number, which one gets us 11? Well, 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. We got it. So 2 will be multiplied by this number, so we have plus 5 here. And then 1 will be, the v will be multiplied by this 1 right here. And there we have, really, our answer. 2v plus 1 times v plus 5, and that is it in factored form. We're given this problem, 2n squared plus 5n plus 2, and we need to factor this completely. Let's first look at the a value, 2. It's a prime number, meaning that this will be in some form of 2n plus or minus something times n plus or minus something else. So we have the basics here. We then have to look at our c value, which is this 2. And we think, okay, what two numbers multiply to be 2? And we know they both have to be positive because our b value here is positive. And that is just 1 and 2. So we have 1 times 2 is 2, or 2 times 1 equals 2. Doesn't really matter the order right now. We now look at the b value. And we say, okay, 2 times one of these numbers plus 1 times the other number gets us 5. And the closest thing I see is, well, if 2 times 2 is 4, right? And then plus 1 is 5, there we have it. So opposite of where the 2n is, I have to put this 2 right here. And then right here, I put the 1. And so 2n times 2 is 4n, plus 1 times n, which is 5n. So there we have our factored form, 2n plus 1 times n plus 2. We're given this problem here, 7a squared plus 53a plus 28, and we need to factor this completely. Our a value is a prime number, so that means we can take, well, this is going to be in some form of 7a plus or minus something else times a plus or minus something else. So now we have to look at the c value, which is 28. And we think, okay, what two numbers multiply to be 28? Well, that's 1 and 28, 2 and 14, and 4 and 7. All right? And we know they're both going to be positive because our b value is positive. Now order, again, doesn't matter. So now we're looking at that b value, 53. And we have to think, okay, 7 times one of these numbers plus 1 times the other number gets us 53. And the first thing I'm looking at is trying to find which one of the numbers, really 7 times one of these numbers, that's like my way of guessing here or estimating. 7 times one of these numbers gets us closest to 53. And that's really 49, right? 7 times 7 is 49. Then if I add 4 to that, I get 53, and that's my goal. So by my best guess, I kind of got it on the first try, but 7 times 7, so I put the 7 on this side, is 49, plus 4 times 1 is 53. And so we see it now in factored form. Our final answer, 7a plus 4 times a plus 7. We're given this problem here, 9k squared plus 66k plus 21, and we need to factor this completely. First thing I'm noticing is that all three of these values, a, b, and c, are divisible by 3. So I'm going to try to simplify this if I can, work with smaller numbers. I'm going to pull out a 3 out of all of them. So in doing so, if I pull out a 3, I'm left with 3 times 3k squared plus 22k plus 7. Now this is a little easier to work with. I look at my c value, and again, this is all within the parentheses, and my c value is 7. What two numbers multiply to be 7? Well, that's just 1 and 7, or 7 and 1. Order doesn't matter. They both will be positive because this b value is also positive. Our a value is a prime number here. It's 3. So we know when we factor this inside part, it's going to be some 3k times, or plus or minus something else, times k plus or minus something else. And again, oh, don't even put that extra parenthesis. Right there. So now I'm asking myself, okay, 3 times one of these numbers plus 1 times the other number gets us 22. And I always go with my first best guess that gets me closest to 22, which is 3 times 7, 21. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 times 1, which is 22. So that was actually pretty easy. Put a 7 here, plus 1 here, and now we have our final answer in factor form, 3, don't forget that part, times 3k plus 1 times k plus 7. We're given this problem here, 15n squared minus 27n minus 6, and we need to factor this completely. So let's look at it. I noticed all three of these values, a, b, and c, have a 3 in them, so we can pull that out. So I'm going to pull out a 3 first. 3 goes in 15 5 times, so we have 5n squared minus 9n minus 2. Okay, so I pulled out the 3, and it makes it a little easier. I like dealing with smaller numbers if possible. So now we're going to deal with just what's inside this parenthesis. Just don't forget the 3 at the end. We look at this and we say, okay, 5 is a prime number. That's our a value. So we know this is going to be in some form of 5n times, or plus or minus something else, times n plus or minus something else. And then now let's look at the c value, which is a negative 2. What two numbers multiply to be negative 2? Well, that's going to be a negative 1 and a positive 2, or a negative 2 and a positive 1. In order, we can flip those around, or it won't matter here. So now I'm focusing on my b value, which is negative 9. I want to say, okay, 5 times which one of these numbers plus 1 times the other number gets me close to negative 9. And I first look at this 5 and say, okay, 5 times which one gets me closest to negative 9? And that's going to be negative 2. 5 times a negative 2, it's a negative 10, plus the other value, 1, gets me negative 9. So opposite of where the 5n is, we put a minus 2 here, and a positive 1. And we can see 5n times a negative 2 is a negative 10n, plus 1 times n, which is a negative, 9n. And there we have our final answer. Don't forget the 3. 3 times 5n plus 1 times n minus 2. We're given this problem right here, 5x squared minus 18x plus 9, and we want to factor this completely. Well, our a value is prime, so we know it's going to be in some form of 5x plus or minus something else times x plus or minus something else. We now look at our C value, which is 9. Since our B value is negative, all right, we know one of our, or both of our values be multiplied to be a positive 9, both of them will be negative. So what two numbers multiply to be 9, but they're both negative? That's negative 1 and negative 9, or negative 3 and negative 3 here. All right. Well, again, order won't matter here, but I want to ask myself this question. What two numbers, 5 times which number plus 1 times the other number gets me to my B value, which is negative 18. And I try to make my first best guess here. Try to find a value that's close. Well, 5 times negative 3 is a negative 15. I see that. That's close to negative 18. Subtract 1 times a negative 3, and bingo, we got it. Negative 18. So minus 3 here, and a minus 3, and we can see 5x times a negative 3 gets me negative 18. Negative 3 plus, 5x times negative 3 is negative 15, plus negative 3 times x, which is a negative 18. And there we have our final answer, 5x minus 3 times x minus 3. We're given this problem right here, 4n squared minus 15n minus 25, and we want to factor this completely. Well, let's look at 4 right here, the a value. Well, that lets us know that our form can either be 2n times 2n, because 2n times 2n gives us 4n squared, or we can have this as 4n times a 1n, okay? So we're going to keep these two base forms in our mind as we move forward. Let's look at negative 25, the C value. What two numbers multiply to be negative 25? Well, that's going to be a negative 1 and a positive 25, or a positive 1 and negative 25. Also, we have negative 5 and positive 5, or if we write it all out here, 5 and negative 5. So now with that information, we'd look at our B value. And we're thinking, okay, which one here, 2n or 4n, times one of these numbers, plus its corresponding 2n or 1n, times the other number, gets us negative 15. All right. And I'm trying to make my first guess as close as possible to negative 15. And I kind of get there by either 4n or 2n, but I'm thinking 4n times a negative 5 gives me negative 20. Minus, or plus a positive 5 gets me negative 15. And so with practice, that's kind of our goal here. With practice, you can guesstimate which one's the best choice. So 4n times a negative 5 is a negative 20n. And then if we put a positive 5 right here, 5 times n is 5n. So negative 20 plus 5n gets us a negative 15n. And there we have our final answer, 4n plus 5 times n minus 5. We're given this problem right here, 4x squared minus 35x plus 49, and we need to factor this completely. Well, our a value is 4x, which means we have two different ways that this problem can be set up. It can be a 2x times a 2x here, that gives us 4x squared, or 4x times a 1x. All right? So where do we go from here? Well, we have our two base values that we're looking at, base sets up. We have to look at 49, our C value. All right? So our C value is a positive 49. But since our B value is negative, we know that both of these numbers that multiply to be 49, both will have to be negative. So it's either negative 1 and negative 49, or negative 7 and negative 7. Okay. So now I'm trying to find which numbers here, which values, this is how I get my best guess, the first ones to try. What number times one of these gets me close to negative 35? And I see 4 times a negative 7, which is a negative 28. That's pretty close to negative 35. So if we tried that, 4 times a negative 7 is a negative 28, and then x times a negative 7 is a negative 7x. We add those together, and we get negative 35. And so our values here, 4x times a negative 7 is a negative 28x, plus a negative 7x gets us a negative 35x. The b value was the clue. And so there we have our final answer, 4x minus 7 times x minus 7. We're given this problem right here, 4n squared minus 17n plus 4, and we need to factor this completely. The 4n, our a value here, 4n squared, tells us that we have two possible forms here. This can either be 2n times a 2n, like that, or it can be a 4n times a 1n. So we have to keep both those in mind as we move forward. Let's look at our c value. Our c value is 4. So we define two numbers that multiply to be 4, or positive 4. But since our b value is negative, that tells us that both of these numbers will be negative. So that's either a negative 1 and a negative 4, or a negative 2 and a negative 2, or some flip order of them. Both those numbers multiply equal positive 4, but they're both negative. So now I'm looking here and trying to see where this fits in, okay? And what I'm looking for is saying, okay, which one of these numbers to get my best guess to try first, and most times it works out. Which numbers here times one of these numbers gets me close to negative 17. And I see, well, 4n times a negative 4 is a negative 16, right? So I'm going to try that first. So 4n times a negative 4 is a negative 16, plus this 1n times the other one, negative 1, is a negative 17, and we've hit our goal in the first try. So if we put a minus 4 here and a minus 1, we can see 4n times negative 4 is a negative 17, negative 1 times, 4n times negative 4 is a negative 16, plus negative 1 times n is a negative 17n. And there we have our final answer, 4n minus 1 times n minus 4. We're given this problem right here, 6x squared plus 7x minus 49, and we need to factor this completely. Well, look at my 6x squared. That lets me know that I have two possibilities for my form setup. It's either 6x times x like this, or what two numbers multiply to be 6, which is a 3 and a 2. So we're going to have 3x here times a 2x. Okay? So we need to keep both of those in mind as we move forward. Now let's look at negative 49. So we have negative 49 right here. And we think, okay, what two numbers multiply to be negative 49? Well, that's either negative 1 and a positive 49, positive 1 and a negative 49, 7 and a negative 7, or negative 7 and positive 7. Okay? All right. So now we're going to keep this in mind, and we're kind of processing through how they can fit here. Okay, which one gets us that we multiply the first number here times the other one plus the second number times this. And the key I look at is the b value, and I'm trying to get my best guess to start off. I don't just want to try every single one. That's not the best way to approach this. I mean, maybe when you're first starting out, but I don't think it's a good way to do that. Look at that positive 7x. It's a positive number, and it's a fairly low number compared to the 49s that we're dealing with. I see that 3 times a number, and if it's multiplied by the same number, or 2 times the same number, they're off by, well, just one multiplication of it. So if 3 times a positive 7, right? 3 times positive 7 is a 21. 2x, or 2 times a negative 7 is a minus 14. 21 minus 14 gets us that 7 right there. And so I would look for a positive 7 here, and a minus 7 here, and we can see that we multiply it out. Again, 3x times the 7 is 21x. Negative 7 times 2x is a negative 14x. We add those together, and we get a positive 7x. So here we have our final answer. 3x minus 7 times 2x plus 7. We're given this problem right here, 6x squared plus 37x plus 6, and we need to factor this completely. Well, let's look at the 6x squared. That lets us know we have two options just our problem can be looking like. It can be some 2x times a 3x here, because that gives us 6x squared, or it can be in some form of 6x times a 1x. So those are our two base forms that we need to keep in mind here. So now let's look at the c value. C is positive, but so is b, and we're looking at c and saying, okay, because of that, what two numbers multiply to be positive 6? And that's 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. So these are the numbers, the pairs that we're dealing with, and we have to look at now our options to set up. Our b value is 37. So what I try to look for first here is say, okay, which number here times which one here gets me the closest to 37. And that's going to be, well, 6. So let's try that. 6x times 6, so it'll be right there, is 36. Well, plus 1, if we put a 1 here, 1 times x is 1x, and 36 plus 1 is 37. And so we have really our answer now. It worked on the first try by making a smart guesstimate, if you want to use that term. 6x plus 1 times x plus 6 gives us that, and that is our final answer. We're given this problem right here. Negative 6a squared minus 25a minus 25, and we need to factor this completely. First thing I'm looking at here is I don't like a negative a value. It's not my cup of tea. So I'm going to pull that out. Negative, and then we have 6a squared minus a plus 25a plus 25. Much easier to deal with, in my humble opinion. So now we're looking at, well, 6a squared. And that leaves us with two options on how we can set up these problems, or this factoring. We can either have 6a times an a, like that form, because 6a times a gives us 6a squared, or we have the option of 2a times a 3a, like that. 2a times 3a is 6a squared. Don't forget the negatives. So these are our two options as we're moving forward. Now, ignore that negative for right now. We're looking on the inside. We're going to see what two numbers multiply to be 25. Well, the options are 1 and 25 and 5 and 5. And we know they're both going to be positive because their b value is positive. Speaking of the b value, we now have to look, say, okay, which one of these gets us close to 25? 2a times one of them, 3a times the other, or 6a times one, a times the other. So first, my first thing I'm looking at is like, okay, well maybe 25. A times 25 is 25 plus 6a, no, that's not 25. What about 6 times 5 is 30 plus 5 is 35? No. What about here? 2a times 5 is 10, 3a, or 10a, 3a times 5 is 15a. Add them together, we got 25. So if we put a plus 5 here and a plus 5 here, we have our answer that works. It's factored form. Negative, don't forget it, parentheses 2a plus 5 times 3a plus 5. We're given this problem right here. 6n squared plus 5n minus 6, and we need to factor this completely. My 6n squared lets me know I have two options that this thing can look like. It can either be some 6n times 1n, which gives us that 6n squared, or it can be in the form of some 2n times a 3n, which also gives us 6n squared. So I keep that in mind as I'm moving forward. Our c value is a negative 6. So what does that mean? We need to find two numbers that multiply to be negative 6. Well, since we have a positive 5n here, we're going to keep that in mind, but one of them is going to be negative, to be multiplied to be negative 6. So negative 1 times 6, or 1 times a negative 6, negative 2 times a 3, or 2 times a negative 3. And we also can flip those orders when we put them in here. So now I have to ask myself a question. What two numbers multiply to be, right? We take 2n times one of these numbers, or 6n times one of these numbers, plus 1 times the other one, or 3n times the other one, gets us 5n. So I'm looking at it and saying, okay, what gets me close? I want to stay close to 5n. Well, 2n here, 2n times a negative 2n is only a negative 4n, but 3n times 3 is 9n. To add them together, we actually get a positive 5. So I kind of went with that with my first guess, but you might have to try a couple of them. Don't just try them all, that wastes a lot of time. Try to find an educated guess. Like for example, I wouldn't do 6 times 6 as my first guess because that's 36. That pair I wouldn't really use. Same with the negative 6. Okay, so again, 2n times a positive 3. Flip around. 2n minus 2. Whoopsie. 2n multiplied by the minus 2. That's a flip there. We have minus 2 here and a positive 3. That's the order. 2n times, so always check it. Make sure you're keeping everything straight. 2n times a negative 2 is a negative 4n. 3 times 3n is a positive 9n. Add them together. we get a positive 5n. So here's our final answer, 2n plus 3 times 3n minus 2. We're given this problem right here, 16b squared plus 60b minus 100, and we need to factor this completely. First thing I'm looking at this is I can probably pull out a common factor. And 4 goes in all of these parts. So if I pull out a 4, I'm left with, well, 4b squared plus 15b minus 25. That's more digestible. So now I can make sure I don't forget that 4, but I'm looking at my 4b squared. And that gives us two ways that we can set this problem up. It can either be a 2b plus or minus something times 2b plus or minus something else. That gives us that 4b squared. Or it can be in the form of 4b plus or minus something times 1b plus or minus something else. All right. So we need to keep that in mind, both of these, kind of ignore the 4 for right now, in mind as our options. So now let's look at a negative 25. Negative 25. What two numbers multiply to be a negative 25? Well, negative 1 and a positive 25, or 1 and a negative 25. We also can have a negative 5 and a positive 5, or a 5 and a negative 5, right? So with that information, I need to say, okay, this first part times one of these plus the second part times one of these gets me a positive 15. That's my goal. And what I try to look at when I'm doing this is trying to find values that are, well, close to 15 to start off with. And that gives me my best guess. So for example, I wouldn't do 4 times 25 to think about first because that's like 100 and we're way off the mark here. But 4 times 5 is 20. We're pretty close to 15 there. So I put a positive 5 here, this pair right here. 4b times 5 is a positive 20b. b times negative 5 is a negative 5b. Subtract that, we got our positive 15b. So yes, I guessed here, kind of, but it was an educated guess. All right, I was smart in which one I tried first, and turns out it worked out. And so we have, again, we can see 4b times 5 is 20b, plus negative 5 times b is positive 15b. So there we have our final answer, 4 times 4b minus 5 times b plus 5. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and like this video. This helps us make more free math lessons for you and for everyone else. So as always, thanks for watching.
Minute Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. Minute Math. When you need help, you use Minute Math. MinuteMathTutor.com.